The Rise and Fall of Nuka Cola, a story from the world before. Come a little closer. Get comfortable. Tonight, I want to tell you a story, not just about a drink, but about an idea. A story from a time when the future looked bright, when the lights never seemed to go out, and when America believed that progress could solve anything. This is the story of Nuka Cola. Part 1. The Dreamer. Long before the world burned, before the sirens, before the ashes, there was a man named John Caleb Bradburton. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't chasing power. He was chasing perfection. Picture him, if you will, in a modest laboratory somewhere in America. The year is 2042. The world outside is optimistic, futuristic, gleaming with chrome and promise. But inside this lab, Bradburton is focused on something seemingly simple. A beverage. A soft drink. For 2 long years, he experimented endlessly. Blending fruit extracts. Testing caffeine levels. Adding more sugar than anyone thought reasonable. Again and again, he adjusted the formula, tweaking, refining, perfecting. 17 fruit essences went into his creation. 17 different flavors, carefully balanced to create something the world had never tasted before. A sharp, energizing bite. A promise of vitality in every sip. A drink that would make you feel alive, awake, ready for anything. And in that quiet laboratory, after countless failed attempts, after hundreds of variations, he finally succeeded. He called it Nuka Cola. The name itself was chosen with care. Nuclear, nucleic, a word that conjured power, energy, the atomic age that promised to transform everything. Combined with cola, a familiar comfort, a tradition. The old and the new merged into something extraordinary. But Bradburton knew that a great product was only the beginning. The real challenge would be getting America to fall in love with it. In 2044, Nuka Cola was released to the public. And America fell in love almost instantly. Within a year, it was everywhere. From corner stores in small towns to towering neon billboards in the great cities. It was marketed as healthy, modern, essential. The advertising called it vitamin fortified, a drink that could improve your health, give you energy, make you better. Never mind that it contained alarming amounts of sugar and caffeine. Never mind the questions some doctors were beginning to ask. The marketing was brilliant, and the taste was undeniable. A bottle of optimism in a glass world. People couldn't get enough of it. Part 2. The Expansion. Success came quickly, and with success came ambition. The Nuka Cola Corporation grew rapidly, and Bradburton became its chief executive. He was no longer just an inventor. He was a businessman, a visionary, a force in American commerce. And he understood that to truly dominate, you needed more than just one product. You needed variety. You needed to be everywhere, in every market, appealing to every taste. So the flavors began to appear. Nuka Cherry was among the first. A sweet, fruity variation that appealed to younger consumers. Then came Nuka Grape, rich and bold. Nuka Orange burst onto the scene with its citrus brightness. Cranberry followed, tart and refreshing. Some of these flavors were developed in-house, crafted by Bradburton's growing team of chemists and food scientists. But others came through a different route entirely. Acquisition. You see, Nuka Cola wasn't just creating new products. It was absorbing its competitors. Take Nuka Cherry, for example. This flavor wasn't invented by Nuka Cola at all. It was originally created by a smaller beverage company called Merle's. A family-owned business, nothing particularly special, just a regional brand with a loyal following. Nuka Cola approached them with an offer. A generous offer, some might say. Others might call it an offer that couldn't be refused. The patents were purchased. The formula became property of the Nuka Cola Corporation. and Merle's faded into history, absorbed completely, as though it had never existed at all. This pattern repeated itself across the country. Nuka Grape started as something called Grape Pearl, another small regional brand, acquired, absorbed, erased from the market except as a flavor variation under the Nuka Cola name. The corporation grew larger, more powerful, more present in American life with each passing year. But not every competitor was willing to sell. And that's where things became interesting. Part 3. The Southwest Standoff. In the American Southwest, there was a beverage company that had been around since 1918. Much older than Nuka Cola. Much more established in the region. It was called Sunset Sarsaparilla. They made root beer primarily. A traditional old-fashioned drink with deep ties to the history of the West. Cowboys and settlers had drunk sarsaparilla. It was woven into the cultural fabric of the region in a way that Nuka Cola, for all its flash and marketing, could never quite replicate. Sunset Sarsaparilla called itself the most popular beverage in the West. And in that region, it was true. In 2058, Nuka Cola made them an offer to buy the company. Sunset Sarsaparilla said no. It was a calculated rejection. The company's leadership looked at the numbers and decided they were doing just fine on their own. They had regional loyalty. They had consistent sales. They had identity. Why become just another flavor in someone else's portfolio? For Nuka Cola, this refusal presented a challenge. They weren't used to being told no, but they adapted. If they couldn't own Sunset Sarsaparilla, they would compete with it directly. And they would do so with all the resources and marketing might of a national corporation. Thus was born Nuka Cola Wild, a root beer-flavored variant, designed specifically to appeal to customers in the Southwest. The packaging evoked the Old West, with rustic colors and frontier imagery. It was positioned as a modern take on a classic taste. And Nuka Cola didn't stop at just creating a competing product. In 2058, at their flagship theme park, which we'll discuss more in just a moment, Nuka Cola opened an entire new section called Dry Rock Gulch, a Western-themed area, complete with animatronic cowboys, saloon attractions, and of course, prominent displays and advertisements for Nuka Cola Wild. It was a massive promotional campaign, a full-court press to win over the Southwest market. And yet, despite all this effort, despite all this money and marketing, Sunset Sarsaparilla retained its dominance in the region. Right up until the Great War in 2077, it remained the preferred drink of the Southwest. Sometimes, regional loyalty runs deeper than any advertising campaign can reach. But at least in this case, the competition remained relatively civil. Both companies coexisted, each serving their markets, engaging in the normal push and pull of business rivalry. The same could not be said for what happened in Maine. Part 4. The Destruction of Vim. Far to the northeast, in the state of Maine, there was another beverage company that caught Nuka Cola's attention. It was called Vim, Pop Incorporated. Founded in 1931 by a man named Herbert Reed, Vim began its life as a medical tonic. Over the years, it evolved into a soft drink company, serving the people of Maine with a variety of flavors and formulations unique to the region. It wasn't a large company. It wasn't a national brand. But it had something valuable: local pride, loyal customers, an identity tied to the state of Maine itself. By the 2070s, Vim was being run by Herbert Reed's descendant, a man named Doyle Reed, who served as CEO. And Nuka Cola wanted to buy it. They made offers, repeatedly. Into 2077, they kept making offers, each one presumably more generous than the last. Doyle Reed refused every single one. For Reed, Vim wasn't just a business. It was a family legacy. It was Maine pride. It represented independence, local identity, something that couldn't be measured in dollars. He had plans to expand, to take Vim national. He launched something called the Vim Ambassador Campaign, an expensive marketing push that involved people in power armor, handing out free samples across the country. Yes, power armor. The promotional budget was enormous. But there were problems. The company had debt. Over $3 million of debt. There had been lawsuits. There had been mysterious incidents of vandalism and equipment failures. Reed dismissed these as bad luck. Coincidence. Isolated incidents that any business might face. But they weren't isolated at all. Behind the scenes, Nuka Cola had hired someone, a specialist in corporate sabotage named Aubrey Copeland. And Copeland had a plan. It was systematic. It was thorough. It was ruthless. Phase 1 was designed to disrupt local confidence in Vim. Suddenly, Vim vending machines started displaying out-of-order signs, even when they were functioning perfectly. Cases of Vim drinks would be swapped out with bottles that had been tampered with, tainted, made undrinkable. Advertisements for Vim would be found covered over with Nuka Cola promotions. And inside the company, there was an investor named Madison Young, who had been influenced to steer other investors away from Vim and toward Nuka Cola investments instead. Phase 2 escalated to direct force. Delivery trucks vanished. Just gone, disappearing on their routes. Workers were assaulted. Vim ambassadors, those power-armored promoters, would find themselves attacked in bars by people who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Vending machines were tampered with more aggressively, damaged beyond repair. All of this happening without clear evidence, without obvious culprits. The goal was to crush morale, to make the business unsustainable, to force Reed to sell. But Reed, stubborn and idealistic, refused to see what was happening. He had employees like a man named Casper Rudd, who correctly identified the attacks as corporate sabotage. But Reed wouldn't listen. He doubled down on expansion. He spent more money on marketing. He believed that success was just around the corner. And so Nuka Cola moved to Phase 3, stealing the recipe. Vim had developed a new soft drink called Captain's Blend. It was going to be their flagship product, the drink that would carry them into national markets. The formula was proprietary, secret, valuable, and Nuka Cola stole it. With the recipe in hand, they could preempt Vim's market launch, create their own version, undercut the company before it ever had a chance to expand. But Phase 3 was never completed, because on October 23, 2077, the bombs fell and the world ended. Vim Pop Incorporated never got its chance to go national. Doyle Reed's dreams died with the old world, and the company faded into history, another casualty of the Great War. But in the ruins that remained, some would find Vim's story preserved in holotapes and terminal entries, and they would learn the truth about what had been done to this small Maine company. Corporate warfare waged in the shadows. Meanwhile, Nuka Cola had also been fighting legal battles. There was a lawsuit years in the making about their iconic bottle design. The original Nuka Cola bottles were curved, elegant, classic. They looked similar to other famous cola bottles of the era. Too similar, as it turned out. An unnamed rival corporation sued for patent infringement, claiming prior rights to the curved bottle design. And in 2077, after years of litigation, they won. Nuka Cola was forced to redesign their bottles. The new design was completely different. Instead of curves, the bottles were shaped like rockets. Sleek, futuristic, evocative of the space age that dominated American culture. The rollout began on the East Coast, and surprisingly, consumers loved it. The rocket-shaped bottles were seen as modern, exciting, perfectly in tune with the era's aesthetic. Sales actually increased. It was a rare instance of a legal defeat turning into a marketing victory. though some of the older stock remained in circulation for a while, particularly a certain glowing blue variant that would become infamous. But we'll return to that shortly. Part 5, Nuka World. But let us turn now to perhaps Nuka Cola's greatest achievement, the physical manifestation of their vision, the place where the brand became more than advertising, more than bottles on shelves. Nuka World. On May 1, 2050, the Nuka Cola Corporation opened the doors to their theme park. Located in Massachusetts, it was designed to be America's premier attraction. Not just a park, but a destination, an experience, a place where families could come and immerse themselves in the world of Nuka Cola. 40,000 tickets were sold on opening day. 40,000 people flooded through the gates, eager to see what this new kind of entertainment had to offer. The park opened with two main areas. Nuka Town, USA, the central hub, designed to look like a perfect American small town from advertisements and dreams. And Kitty Kingdom, an area specifically for children, full of gentle rides and colorful attractions. It was an immediate success, and Nuka Cola didn't stop there. In 2058, they opened Dry Rock Gulch, the Western-themed area designed to compete with Sunset Sarsaparilla. Animatronic cowboys, saloon shows, a recreation of the Old West, filtered through corporate imagination. In 2070, after 7 years of construction, Safari Adventure opened its gates. An exotic, dangerous attraction featuring robotic animals and themed environments. It was marketed as a journey through the wild places of the world, tamed and made safe for American families. And then in 2072 came the Galactic Zone, a space-themed section of the park, full of laser tag arenas, robotic battles, simulated alien invasions. It was everything the space age promised, condensed into attractions and rides. When the Galactic Zone opened, park attendance nearly doubled overnight. Nuka World had become more than a theme park. It was a cultural phenomenon. To support the park, Nuka Cola even built an entire town nearby. They called it Bradburton after the company's founder. Bradburton, Massachusetts, was created in 2060, specifically to house the park's employees. Workers could live close to their jobs, reducing commute times, making operations more efficient. It was a company town in the classic American tradition. Everything built by and for Nuka Cola. From the outside, it all looked perfect. Happy families, thrilling attractions, a celebration of American innovation and corporate success. But beneath the surface, darker things were taking shape. You see, Nuka World wasn't just a theme park. It was also a front for military research. The partnership began subtly. Robco Industries, a robotics corporation with deep ties to the U.S. military, provided many of the animatronics and mechanical attractions. But these weren't ordinary theme park robots. They were being tested, graded, prepared for purposes beyond entertainment. In the Galactic Zone, robots like Nukatrons, Mr. Frosties, and Protectrons were outfitted with combat protocols. The Star Control System allowed centralized command of these units, turning a simulated space battle into something that could, if necessary, become very real. Prototype power armor suits were displayed in the park, ostensibly as promotional items. But they were functional, military-grade equipment, shown off to the public as if they were nothing more than mascots. And in the deepest parts of the park, hidden beneath the world of refreshment bottling plant attraction, there were laboratories. Secret laboratories where Nuka Cola's elite team of chemists worked on something called Project Cobalt. But that story requires us to go back to 2076 to understand a deal that was made in desperation and ambition. Part 6. The Deal. John Caleb Bradburton was afraid. By 2076, he was an old man, successful beyond measure, wealthy beyond imagination. But none of that could protect him from the one thing that comes for everyone: death, and Bradburton was terrified of it. He had built an empire. He had created something that would outlast him. But he himself would die, would be forgotten, would fade into history like every other executive and entrepreneur, unless he could find a way to live forever. Through his connections in Washington, his political influence, his corporate power, Bradburton learned about a classified military program. It was called LEAP-X, Life Extension and Prolongation, a biomechanical experiment designed to preserve human life indefinitely. It was experimental. It was dangerous. It was barely beyond the prototype stage. But it was a chance at immortality. Bradburton wanted in. The military wasn't interested in just giving this technology away, even to someone as influential as Bradburton. They wanted something in return. So on March 13, 2076, a deal was struck. Bradburton would give the military access to his elite team of organic chemists. The Beveragers, they were called. The best minds in the Nuka Cola Corporation, responsible for all their flavor innovations and chemical breakthroughs. These chemists would be put to work on a classified project. Project Cobalt. Their task was to weaponize a substance that Nuka Cola had recently developed. A glowing, radioactive isotope called strontium-90. In exchange, Bradburton would be granted access to the LEAP-X program. He agreed immediately. The lead scientist on Project Cobalt was a man named Rex Meacham. He was the head beverager, brilliant in his field, and eagerly committed to the work. Meacham and his team began developing weapons. They enhanced power armor with strontium-90, allowing it to absorb and redirect energy more efficiently. They modified Fat Man launchers, the portable nuclear catapults, to use strontium-90 in their ammunition, creating more powerful blasts. They even converted thirst zappers, novelty ray guns sold in the park, into genuine area effect weapons that used Nuka Cola variants as ammunition. It was genius. It was horrifying. It was exactly what the military wanted. But the project came with costs. Funds were diverted from park maintenance to support the research. Safety standards slipped. Equipment began to fail. In 2076, there were over 260 injuries reported at Nuka World. By early 2077, 2 people had died in ride malfunctions. The park was falling apart. But Bradburton didn't care. He had secured his immortality. Part 7. The Procedure. On April 2, 2077, John Caleb Bradburton underwent the LEAP-X procedure. He had imagined something grand. A full-body biosuit, keeping him whole, allowing him to move, to continue leading his company, to live and work for centuries. But that's not what LEAP-X offered. The technology was limited. Power requirements were immense. The system could only sustain 15 pounds of organic material. 15 pounds. About the weight of a human head. And so, in a secret vault built beneath his office in Nukatown, USA, Bradburton's body was discarded. His head was removed, placed in a nutrient-filled jar, connected to life support machinery and monitoring systems. The procedure was successful, if you could call it that. He was alive, conscious, aware, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak except through a voice synthesizer, couldn't do anything except exist, trapped in a jar, watching screens, waiting. His assistant, Peyton Huxley, managed company affairs for a time. But with the park deteriorating and the world on the brink of war, there was less and less to manage. The vault sealed shut when the bombs fell, and Bradburton was left alone in the dark. For 210 years. Imagine it if you can. Conscious, thinking, feeling, trapped in absolute isolation, unable to move, unable to end your own existence, unable to do anything but remember and regret. He had wanted immortality. Instead, he got a prison, a coffin he couldn't escape. When wastelanders finally found him in 2287, He begged them to kill him. Mercy, he called it. After everything he had built, everything he had achieved, all he wanted was the one thing he had spent his entire life trying to avoid: death. Part 8. Quantum. But let us return to 2076, to the final year before the world ended, and talk about Nuka Cola's most infamous creation. Nuka Cola Quantum. The beveragers working on Project Cobalt had been experimenting with strontium-90. It was a radioactive isotope, unstable, dangerous, but with unique properties. It glowed. A soft, luminous blue. Someone, perhaps Rex Meacham himself, had an idea. What if they put it in a beverage? Seemed insane. It was insane. Radioactive material in a drink meant for human consumption. But this was the Nuka Cola Corporation. Innovation, they called it. Progress. The project was given a code name, Sea Lion, and Rex Meacham himself named the final product, Quantum. They tested it, of course. They had to. Regional facilities were used for the initial trials, focus groups, test subjects, and people got sick, severely sick. Some died. Organ failure, radiation poisoning. Symptoms that developed quickly and devastatingly. The company's legal department, led by a vice president named Pearson Huxley, moved swiftly. Health waivers were prepared. Test subjects signed documents absolving Nuka Cola of responsibility. When people died, their families received packages. Neutral condolences, the company called them. Fruit and cheese baskets, sent with generic sympathy cards. No admissions of fault. No lawsuits. Just quiet compensation and sealed documents. The formula was adjusted. Pomegranate was added to improve the taste. The marketing copy was prepared. Twice the calories, twice the carbs, twice the caffeine, twice the taste. Side effects were documented but downplayed. Dizziness. Blue-tinted urine. Mild radiation exposure. The Food and Drug Association passed it. Whether through genuine evaluation or corporate influence, the product was approved for sale. In October 2077, Nuka Cola Quantum was released. The rollout was limited, primarily on the East Coast. The Washington, D.C. bottling plant handled most of the production. The world of refreshment attraction at Nuka World even featured a glowing blue river of Quantum, a striking visual centerpiece. The public reaction was mixed. Some were fascinated by the glowing bottles. Others were deeply unsettled. Debates started about safety, about regulation, about whether a company should be allowed to sell radioactive beverages. But those debates didn't last long, because on October 23, 2077, the bombs fell. And suddenly, a little bit of radiation in a soft drink seemed almost quaint. Part 9. The End of Everything. October 23, 2077. The day the Great War began. The day the nuclear weapons launched. The day the world burned. At Nuka World, there was panic. Employees tried to evacuate. Guests scrambled for exits. But the park was massive, sprawling, difficult to escape from quickly. Some made it out. Most didn't. When the bombs fell and the radiation spread, those who remained in the park found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The robots, already malfunctioning from poor maintenance, went haywire. Some attacked people. Others simply wandered aimlessly, their programming corrupted. In Kitty Kingdom, the staff tried to shelter in place. But radiation seeped in. Over time, they transformed into feral ghouls, their minds deteriorating, their bodies becoming twisted mockeries of human form. The costumed performers, the cheerful clowns meant to entertain children, became shambling horrors. In the galactic zone, the military-grade robots activated their combat protocols. Anyone trying to access certain areas would be met with lethal force. Safari Adventures' robotic animals, already dangerous by design, became even more deadly without proper oversight. The park fell silent, except for the mechanical sounds of robots still performing their routines, greeting visitors who would never come, operating rides that no one would ever ride again. And beneath it all, in his sealed vault, John Caleb Bradburton remained alive, conscious, alone, unable to die. Part 10. The corporation falls. The Nuka Cola Corporation died on that same day. Oh, the infrastructure remained. The bottling plants, the vending machines, the warehouses full of product. But the company itself, the organization, the people who made decisions and ran operations, all of that vanished overnight. Without leadership, without supply chains, without a functioning economy, the corporation simply ceased to exist. The advertisements remained, though, painted on walls, displayed on billboards, glowing faintly in the ruins. Drink Nuka Cola. Refresh yourself. Taste the future. Slogans for a world that no longer existed. In the years that followed, in the decades and then centuries after the bombs, humanity survived. Barely. In scattered communities, in underground vaults, in the ruins of old cities. And Nuka Cola bottles were everywhere. The company had been so successful, so ubiquitous, that their products were scattered across the entire wasteland. In ruined stores, in abandoned homes, in the trunks of cars that would never drive again. The glass bottles were mostly broken, but the caps remained. Durable, plentiful, impossible to easily counterfeit due to their crimped design. And someone had an idea. Around the early 2100s, in a settlement called the Hub, water merchants needed a currency. Paper money was useless. The old governments were gone. Trust in abstract value had collapsed. But water was valuable, essential. Everyone needed it. And bottle caps could represent water. The Hub merchants established a system. One Nuka Cola cap equaled a fixed amount of clean, potable water. The caps themselves became redeemable, backed by something real. Because there were so many caps, but the supply was ultimately finite, they worked perfectly as currency. You couldn't easily make more. You couldn't inflate the supply. They were, in a strange way, more stable than any currency the old world had used. And so, throughout the wasteland, Nuka Cola caps became money. The corporation was dead. Its products were antiques. But its legacy had become the foundation of a new economy. Part 11. The mascot. Among the remnants of the old world, one image appeared again and again. Nuka Girl. The official mascot of the Nuka Cola Corporation, created sometime before 2062. She was depicted as a blonde woman in a retro-futuristic spacesuit. Red accents, black gloves, thigh-high heeled boots, a ray gun called a thirst zapper held confidently in her hand. She was adventure. She was the future. She was everything the corporation wanted customers to feel when they drank their product. In 2062, Nuka Girl rocket suit costumes sold out nationwide. Halloween became a sea of children dressed as this corporate mascot, playing Space Explorer with their thirst zapper toy guns. Her image was everywhere. On posters, on standees, in advertisements, and in Nuka World, there was even an animatronic Nuka Girl in the Galactic Zone, speaking cheerfully to visitors. Cadets, I'm Nuka Girl, ace pilot. You ready for your first combat mission? After the war, her image remained. Faded posters in ruined buildings, damaged standees in destroyed stores. Wastelanders who had never known the old world would see her and wonder who she was, what she represented. Some saw her as a symbol of false promises. Corporate manipulation designed to sell products to people who didn't need them. Others saw her as a reminder of a time when people could afford to dream, when the future seemed full of possibilities instead of dangers. But she had no story beyond what the corporation created for her. No deeper meaning. No secret history. She was advertising. Nothing more, nothing less. And yet she endured. Part 12. The flavors remain. In the wasteland, scavengers learned to recognize the different flavors by their bottle caps and labels. Nuka Cola Original, the classic flavor that started it all. Nuka Cherry, sweet and fruity, once the product of a company called Merle's. Nuka Grape, deep purple, acquired from grape pearl. Nuka Orange, bright and citrus. Nuka Cola Cranberry, tart and distinctive. Nuka Cola Twist, a lemon-lime variant. Nuka Cola Quartz, a pale beverage that glowed faintly even without strontium 90. Nuka Cola Victory, marketed with patriotic imagery during the war years. Nuka Cola Wild, the root beer created to compete with Sunset Sarsaparilla. Nuka Cola Dark, a rum-flavored variant, one of the stranger experiments. And of course, Nuka Cola Quantum, glowing blue, radioactive, dangerous even centuries later. Each flavor had slightly different effects on those who drank them. Most provided a temporary boost of energy. The sugar and caffeine, remarkably preserved by the company's chemical processes, still functioned even after 2 centuries. But they all came with a cost. Radiation. Every sip added a small amount of radioactive contamination to the drinker's body. Not much. Not enough to be immediately dangerous. But in the wasteland, where radiation was already everywhere, every little bit mattered. Some flavors were worse than others. Quantum, of course, was the most dangerous. The strontium 90 it contained remained potent, actively harmful. But people drank it anyway, because in the wasteland you took what you could find. And sometimes, a glowing bottle of pre-war soda was the best option available. Part 13. Sunset endures. Interestingly, in the Southwest, another pre-war beverage had also survived. Sunset Sarsaparilla, the company that had refused to be bought, that had maintained its independence right up until the end. Their bottles were scattered throughout the region, just like Nuka Cola's. And their distinctive star-shaped bottle caps became collectibles, sought after by treasure hunters and collectors. There were rumors of a treasure, a massive cache of Sunset Sarsaparilla products hidden away somewhere. Caps could be turned in for rewards, according to old promotional materials still found in ruins. Some wastelanders spent years collecting these star caps, believing the treasure was real. And in a way, Sunset Sarsaparilla had won. Not by defeating Nuka Cola in the marketplace. Not by outselling them or outmarketing them. But by simply surviving as itself. By maintaining its identity even when faced with overwhelming corporate pressure. In the post-war world, both brands existed side by side, neither one dominant, neither one extinct. The competition that had driven both companies before the war was now irrelevant. Because there were no companies anymore. Just products scattered and found, relics of a world that had destroyed itself. Part 14. Vim's Quiet Grave. In Maine, the ruins of Vim, Pop Incorporated, could still be found. The factory damaged but standing. The vending machines, rusted but recognizable. Bottles of Vim, in various flavors, surprisingly intact after centuries. And for those who searched carefully, who accessed the old terminals and holotapes, the full story of the company's demise could be discovered. The sabotage, the corporate warfare, the systematic destruction carried out by Nuka Cola operatives. Doyle Reed's stubborn optimism, his refusal to see what was being done to his company. The stolen recipe for Captain's Blend. All of it, preserved in digital records, waiting to be found. Some wastelanders who discovered this history felt anger at Nuka Cola. Others felt sadness for what had been lost. But most simply took the Vim bottles they found and added them to their inventory. Because in the wasteland, sentiment was a luxury. And functional pre-war beverages, regardless of their backstory, were valuable. The dream of taking Vim National had died with Doyle Reed, but the product itself in small quantities remained. A footnote in the larger story of Nuka Cola's dominance. Part 15. The World of Refreshment. Those who explored the ruins of Nuka World eventually discovered the world of refreshment, an attraction that had been designed to show visitors how Nuka Cola was made. Bright, cheerful, educational. Families would ride through on little boats, watching animatronic workers and automated systems demonstrate the bottling process. It was propaganda, of course. The real manufacturing was far less whimsical. But it had been effective propaganda. And hidden beneath this attraction, in laboratories that had never been part of the public tour, the remnants of Project Cobalt could be found. Equipment for working with radioactive materials. Notes and holotapes from Rex Meacham and his team. The bodies of the scientists who had died there after the war, trapped underground, slowly succumbing to radiation poisoning. Meacham's final recordings were particularly grim. He spoke of completing the project, of finishing the weapons modifications, of waiting for military rescue that never came. He mentioned killing his colleagues. Kate Levitt, who had argued against the rush testing. Dr. Bennell, who had tried to escape and been shot for it. And then, finally, silence. The project completed. The scientists dead. The weapons knowledge preserved in files that no one would ever use. Because the military that had commissioned Project Cobalt was gone. The country it had served no longer existed. All that remained were the ghosts and the radiation. Part 16. The raiders claim their prize. By the year 2287, Nuka World had new residents. Raiders. 3 gangs had taken control of the park, fighting off or absorbing previous inhabitants. The disciples brutal and violent. The pack wild and animalistic. The operators calculating and profit-focused. They saw the park as a fortress, a base of operations, a source of resources. The robots were reprogrammed or destroyed. The attractions were repurposed into defenses and living quarters. And deep beneath Nukatown, USA, they had no idea that John Caleb Bradburton still existed, still conscious, still trapped, still begging for death. When a wanderer from the wasteland eventually found the hidden vault, Bradburton could finally speak to someone after 2 centuries of isolation. And what did he ask for? Not rescue, not restoration of his company, not revenge against those who had taken over his park. He asked to die. The wanderer was given a choice. Shut down the life support, granting Bradburton the mercy of death. Or activate the park security systems, giving him control of the robots, allowing him one final act of power. Most chose mercy, because after learning his story, after understanding what he had done in pursuit of immortality, most people felt that death was the kindest thing they could offer. The machines shut down. The screens went dark. And John Caleb Bradburton, founder of the Nuka Cola Corporation, finally died. 210 years after he should have. Part 17. Reflections in Glass. So what are we to make of this story? The rise and fall of Nuka Cola, a beverage company that became a cultural force, that crushed its competitors, that partnered with the military, that built theme parks and developed weapons. A company led by a man so afraid of death that he traded everything for a form of immortality that became torture. In many ways, Nuka Cola was the perfect embodiment of the pre-war world. Ambition without limits. Innovation without ethics. Success measured purely in market dominance and profit. They created products people loved. Flavors that brought joy. Experiences that families treasured. But they also engaged in corporate sabotage, stole from competitors, partnered in weapons development, and marketed radioactive beverages to an unsuspecting public. They built monuments to consumerism while the world prepared for nuclear war. And when the end came, all their success, all their dominance, all their carefully crafted marketing meant nothing. The corporation died. The products remained. And the bottle caps became currency for survivors trying to rebuild civilization from the ashes. There's irony in that, don't you think? Nuka Cola wanted to be essential, to be part of every American's daily life. And in the wasteland, they achieved it. Not through taste or marketing, but because their refuse became the foundation of a new economy. The company won by losing everything. Part 18. The Legacy. Today, or rather in the world of the wasteland, Nuka Cola is everywhere and nowhere. Everywhere in that its products are scattered across the ruins. You can't explore for long without finding bottles, caps, vending machines, advertisements. Nowhere in that the corporation, the entity, the organized force behind the brand, is completely gone. What remains is a ghost, a memory, an echo of the old world. Wastelanders have different relationships with these remnants. Some see Nuka Cola products as valuable resources. The beverages can restore health, provide energy. The bottles can be used or traded. The caps are money. Others see them as reminders of everything that went wrong. Corporate excess, mindless consumerism, the kind of thinking that led to the Great War. And some, particularly the older ghouls who remember the world before, have more complicated feelings. They remember when Nuka Cola was new, exciting, everywhere. They remember the advertisements, the jingles, the taste. They remember Nuka World before it fell. And they remember that, for all its faults, the old world had things worth missing. Comfort, abundance, the simple pleasure of a cold drink on a hot day. Things the wasteland can never quite replicate. Part 19. The Imitators. In the centuries after the war, some have tried to recreate Nuka Cola's success. Not the beverage itself. The recipes are known, the equipment sometimes still functional. Making the actual drinks is possible, if difficult. No, they've tried to recreate the brand, the marketing, the cultural significance. But it never works the same way, because Nuka Cola's power came from more than just its products. It came from being part of a functioning society, a growing economy, a world that believed in progress. The wasteland doesn't have that. What it has instead is survival, scarcity, the constant threat of violence, radiation, starvation. In such a world, brand loyalty seems almost absurd. You drink what you can find. You use what works. Nostalgia is a luxury. And yet the brand persists, not through corporate strategy, not through advertising campaigns, but through simple ubiquity. There's so much Nuka Cola merchandise, so many products, so much infrastructure, that it becomes unavoidable. The brand lives on because it's literally built into the landscape. Part 20. The Bottlers. In some communities, industrious wastelanders have managed to restart Nuka Cola production. Not officially, of course. There's no corporation to authorize it, no quality control, no centralized distribution. But they've found the factories, repaired the machines, figured out the formulas more or less, and they've started making new batches. Sometimes it's done out of nostalgia. A desire to taste something from the old world, made fresh instead of found in ruins. Sometimes it's purely economic. Nuka Cola sells. People want it. Why not make more? And sometimes it's about control. In the wasteland, resources mean power. And if you control the production of something people want, something they'll trade for, you have leverage. These new bottlers often face challenges the old corporation never had to deal with. Raiders demanding protection money. Rival settlements wanting exclusive contracts. The constant threat of equipment breaking down with no easy way to get replacement parts. But they persist. Because in the wasteland, any functioning business is a kind of miracle. The drinks they produce are rarely identical to the original. The water sources are different, often irradiated. The ingredients have to be substituted. The equipment, even when repaired, doesn't work quite right. But they're close enough. And in a world where most food and drink is some variation of scavenged or mutated, even an approximate Nuka Cola is a luxury. Part 21. The collectors. And then there are the collectors. People who seek out Nuka Cola memorabilia not for practical use, but for its own sake. They hunt for rare flavors, special edition bottles, promotional items, anything that carries the brand. In some settlements, entire rooms are dedicated to these collections. Shelves lined with bottles, carefully organized by flavor and condition. Posters preserved behind makeshift frames. Vending machines restored to working order, even if they'll never be properly stocked again. It's a strange hobby in the wasteland. Impractical, potentially dangerous, given that some collectors will venture into highly irradiated areas to find specific items. But it provides something important: connection to the past. A sense that the old world was real, was more than just ruins and radiation. These collections become informal museums, places where wastelanders can see artifacts from before the war, arranged and labeled, given context. And sometimes, looking at a pristine bottle of Nuka Cherry, reading the faded label, imagining the world where such things were common, people find a strange kind of peace. Not happiness exactly, more like perspective. The world ended, but it had existed. People had lived, had worked, had created things. And some of those things, however flawed, however tied to the problems that led to destruction, were worth remembering. Part 22. The Quantum Hunters. Among the collectors, there's a special subset. Those who hunt specifically for Nuka Cola Quantum. The glowing blue bottles are rare. Production was limited, the rollout interrupted by the war. But they're also distinctive. In the darkness of ruins, they glow softly, making them easier to spot. This same glow, of course, indicates active radiation. Quantum is dangerous in a way that other Nuka Cola flavors aren't. But for some, that's part of the appeal. In the wasteland, where radiation is everywhere anyway, where danger is constant, drinking something that glows seems almost poetic. A literal embodiment of the world's contamination, packaged in a bottle, marketed with a smile. Some quantum hunters are simply completionists, wanting every flavor for their collections. Others are mercenaries, gathering bottles to sell to those willing to pay premium prices. And a few are researchers, studying the strontium-90 isotope, trying to understand its properties, perhaps even finding ways to use it. Quantum represents Nuka Cola at its most ambitious and most reckless. A product that should never have been made, marketed to people who didn't understand the risks, released just days before the world ended. It's a perfect symbol, really, of innovation without wisdom, of progress without caution. The pre-war world in a bottle. Part 23. The empty vending machines. Throughout the wasteland, Nuka Cola vending machines stand silent. Most are empty, long since looted. But they remain monuments to a distribution system that once spanned the nation. Some wastelanders use them as storage. Others as shelters, cramming themselves into the empty interiors during radiation storms. A few machines still function more or less, restored by scavengers or simply durable enough to survive. Insert the right currency, press the right button, and a bottle might actually dispense. It's a surreal experience for those who remember the old world. Standing in the ruins, surrounded by destruction, and having a vending machine work exactly as it was designed to. That simple transaction, currency for product, feels like a connection across time. For a moment, the world hasn't ended. You're just a person buying a drink. And then the moment passes. You're back in the wasteland. The drink is centuries old. The currency is scavenged bottle caps. But for that brief instant, normalcy existed. These machines, even the broken ones, serve another purpose. They're landmarks. Meet me at the Nuka Cola machine outside the old church. The raiders set up camp near the rusted vending machines by the highway. In a world where street signs have faded and maps are useless, these physical objects become navigation points. The corporation built them to sell products. Now they serve as waypoints in the wasteland. Another unintended legacy. Part 24. The taste of the old world. Those who've actually tasted fresh, properly refrigerated Nuka Cola from before the war are increasingly rare. Most are ghouls, humans transformed by radiation into immortal, decaying beings. They remember when Nuka Cola was cold, carbonated, sweet. They remember vending machines that were always stocked, stores that had entire aisles dedicated to different flavors. They remember when drinking a Nuka Cola was unremarkable, common, something you did without thinking. And now, when they find a bottle in the ruins, warm and flat and slightly irradiated, they often can't bring themselves to drink it, because it's not the same. It'll never be the same. And tasting it now would only reinforce how much has been lost. For everyone else, for those born after the war, Nuka Cola is just another scavenged resource. They've never known it fresh. They don't have memories of ice-cold bottles on summer afternoons. To them, it's medicine, essentially, something that provides temporary benefits at the cost of mild radiation exposure. They don't understand the nostalgia, the emotional weight these drinks carry for those who remember. And maybe that's better. Maybe it's easier to live in the wasteland without mourning what was lost. Part 25. The recipes survive. Interestingly, many of Nuka Cola's recipes survived the war. Not in corporate archives, which were mostly destroyed, but in the terminals and holotapes scattered throughout facilities, bottling plants, research laboratories, even some Nuka World attractions. The formulas are there, preserved digitally, waiting to be found. 17 fruit essences for the original. The specific pomegranate edition that made quantum. The proprietary blends for each regional variant. It's all documented. The corporation was meticulous about such things. Some wastelanders with chemistry knowledge have studied these recipes. A few have tried to recreate them exactly, sourcing ingredients from mutated plants and pre-war stocks. The results are mixed, because the world has changed. The fruits that provided those 17 essences are gone, replaced by mutated versions with different properties. The water is contaminated. The equipment, even when functional, has degraded. You can follow the recipe precisely and still end up with something that tastes different. But the attempt matters. The effort to recreate something from the old world, to prove that not everything has to be scavenged or improvised. It's an act of defiance against the wasteland itself. A statement that humanity can still create, not just survive. Part 26. The advertisements endure. Perhaps most striking is how the advertising has survived. Painted murals on building sides, billboards along highways, posters in every imaginable location. The messages are simple, repetitive, designed to lodge in minds and never leave. Drink Nuka Cola. Refresh yourself with Nuka Cola Quantum. Nuka Cola, the taste of a bright future. That last one is particularly ironic. Found on a wall near a crater where a nuclear bomb detonated. The taste of a bright future, indeed. But what's fascinating is how these advertisements still work, in a way. Not as marketing exactly. There's no corporation to benefit from increased sales. But as cultural artifacts. As reminders of what the old world valued and how it communicated. The bright colors, the smiling mascots, the promises of health, energy, happiness. All preserved on walls and signs, outlasting the civilization that created them. Some wastelanders paint over them. Others preserve them intentionally. There are even cases of new communities copying the style, creating their own advertisements for their own products, using Nuka Cola's visual language because it's familiar, because it evokes a time when things were made well and distributed widely. The corporation's marketing has become a template for post-war commerce. Not because anyone remembers the campaigns or studied the strategy, but because the results are still visible, still effective at catching attention. Nuka Cola taught the wasteland how to advertise. An odd legacy, but a legacy nonetheless. Part 27. The Theme Park Pilgrimage. For some wastelanders, visiting the ruins of Nuka World is a kind of pilgrimage. They travel across dangerous territory, risk radiation and raiders, to see this place they've heard about. The legendary theme park. The monument to corporate excess. The place where Nuka Cola's vision was made physical. What they find is usually disappointing. The attractions are broken. The animatronics are hostile or defunct. The bright paint has faded to rust and decay. Raiders have turned the park into a fortress, hostile to visitors. And yet, people keep coming. Because ruins like this are rare. Most buildings from the old world are just buildings. Homes, offices, stores. But Nuka World was special even before the war. It was designed to be extraordinary. And that extraordinary quality lingers, even in decay. You can walk through Nuka Town, USA and imagine what it looked like when it was clean, when the lights worked, when animatronic merchants welcomed you with scripted cheer. You can stand in the galactic zone and picture families experiencing simulated space battles, children laughing as they pretended to fight aliens. The imagination has to work harder now. You have to look past the rust, the radiation warning signs, the bodies of those who died trying to explore. But if you try, you can almost see it. The dream that Bradburton built. The future that never came. Part 28. The Final Flavor. There are rumors, unconfirmed, of flavors that never made it to market. Nuka Cola Boost. Nuka Cola Clear. Nuka Cola Black. Test batches mentioned in corporate documents but never released. Some flavor scientists at Nuka Cola were apparently working on these variants right up until the war. Boost was meant to be an energy drink, even more caffeinated than Quantum. Clear was a marketing experiment, transparent cola to appeal to health-conscious consumers. Black was described as having a unique flavor profile, though the specifics are lost. None of them were ever produced at scale. The Great War interrupted development. But occasionally, in the deepest parts of old Nuka Cola facilities, explorers claim to find bottles of these unreleased flavors. Test batches. Samples kept for quality control. Whether these claims are real or elaborate hoaxes is difficult to verify. But the idea persists that somewhere in the wasteland, there are flavors that almost no one has ever tasted. The final creations of a corporation that ran out of time. For collectors, these would be the ultimate finds. Not just rare but unique. Pieces of history that barely existed even in the old world. The hunt continues. Part 29. The Corporate Ghost. In a broader sense, Nuka Cola haunts the wasteland. Not literally, though there are plenty of ghosts, but as a presence, an influence, a reminder of how the old world worked. The corporation pioneered aggressive business tactics that other companies copied. The saturated marketing, the acquisition of competitors, the partnerships with government and military. These weren't unique to Nuka Cola, but they perfected them. And in doing so, they helped create the culture that led to the Great War. A culture of endless consumption, of competition without limits, of innovation without consideration for consequences. When wastelanders find evidence of Nuka Cola's corporate sabotage, its dangerous products, its military partnerships, some are angry. They see the corporation as emblematic of everything wrong with the old world. Others are more philosophical. One company among thousands, all doing similar things, all contributing to the same problems. Blaming Nuka Cola specifically seems pointless. They were a product of their time, successful because they understood and exploited the values of their society. And those values destroyed the world. But here's the complicated part. People still want Nuka Cola products. Even knowing the history, even understanding what the corporation did. Because in the wasteland, practical concerns override moral judgments. A bottle of Nuka Cherry will restore your health whether or not you approve of corporate sabotage. A Nuka Cola cap will buy supplies regardless of the company's ethical failings. The corporation's sins are historical. Its products are useful now. And in the wasteland, that's what matters. Survival first, ethics second, or maybe never. Part 30. The story ends. And so we come to the end of this story, the rise and fall of Nuka Cola. From a man's obsession with perfection, to a corporate empire, to a wasteland currency. From 17 fruit essences to radioactive isotopes. From theme parks full of laughter to ruins haunted by feral ghouls. What have we learned? Perhaps that ambition without wisdom leads to disaster. That success measured purely in market dominance is hollow. That the things we create outlast us, but not always in the ways we intend. John Caleb Bradburton wanted immortality. He got it, in a sense. His company's products will likely outlast human civilization itself. But he personally suffered a fate worse than death, conscious and trapped for 2 centuries. The beveragers wanted to advance science. They created weapons that were never used and a drink that poisoned its consumers. The marketers wanted to sell a lifestyle. They succeeded so well that their advertisements outlasted the lifestyle itself. In the wasteland, Nuka Cola is everywhere and nowhere. The bottles are common, but the experience is gone. You can drink the beverage, but you can't visit the world it came from. It's a ghost of consumerism, haunting the ruins. And perhaps that's the most important lesson. That the things we build, the companies we create, the products we market, all of this will outlast us. But it will exist in a context we can't control or predict. Nuka Cola was designed for a world of plenty, of progress, of optimism. Instead, it exists in a world of scarcity, stagnation, and survival. The product is the same. The world is unrecognizable. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, in your safe bed, in your intact home, in your functioning world, consider this. The things you take for granted, the brands you know, the products you use daily, they feel permanent, essential, part of the fabric of reality. But they're not. They're as fragile as everything else. And if the world changed tomorrow, if everything fell apart, those brands would become something different. Relics, resources, remnants, just like Nuka Cola. Thank you for listening to this story. The story of a drink that became more than a drink. The story of a company that became a currency. The story of a dream that became a nightmare that became a ghost. Rest well. And when you wake, perhaps you'll look at the everyday objects around you a little differently. Wondering what they might become if everything changed. Wondering what stories they might tell centuries from now. Good night. And remember, the future is never quite what we expect. But the past always lingers in unexpected ways. Sleep well.